And the new glass cannon of World of Warcraft Oscar goes to Retribution Paladins. Congratulations, well deserved, well deserved. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel, Gyro here. Today we're finally, I'm sure you were wondering when is that gonna happen, looking at Retribution Paladin. I have finally geared up my Retribution Paladin enough to do a full clear of a horrific vision, which we are using on this channel as casuals as a measurement of potency, as a measurement of power for different classes and different specs. If this sounds like your cup of tea and you like this type of content, playing many alts perhaps as a casual player, why not subscribe and show your support? It is very much appreciated and not taken for granted. So my Paladin has a cloak rank only 12, does not have Gift of the Titans, has reasonable gear for a casual player who doesn't raid normal heroic mythic and doesn't push high mythic plus keys. Now, why am I joking about calling Retribution Paladin a new glass cannon? Well, mainly because saying simply that Retribution feels a bit soft, well, sounds a little bit like I have already used that term on Enhancement Shaman, which is totally true. It does feel a little bit soft. Retribution feels really soft, really like a glass cannon. Yet, the cannon part talks about the fact that, not that I forgot that Retribution is not a ranged class, I remember, but it is definitely capable of dishing out quite a lot of damage. The burst on Retribution is very substantial. The Templar Verdict hits like a truck, especially if you are built for crit and if you are critting a lot. As Retribution, you will see high numbers, especially on single targets. It is not to say that Retribution does not offer us a substantial amount of AoE damage. They do, the Paladins, Retribution Paladins do. I am building around Purification Protocol again as a major essence of choice. I think it is still the easiest to obtain, casual friendly essence that you should always be running unless you are a fan of Essence of the Focusing Iris. I am not particularly a fan, and I am considering to maybe have a video for you guys where I'm talking about essences and corruptions specifically, not about classes, just about essences and corruptions. Let me know if you're interested in that. I can share my casual kind of impressions of what I think is overrated in my opinion, oversimmed and overrated, but in the gameplay it actually feels different, and some essences that perhaps are not that prolific on some websites and on some charts and on some, I don't know, Mythic Plus Invitational, whatever, but they do shine in Horrific Visions, which is my content, which is probably your content as well, I'm guessing here. So Purification Protocol is my staple ability for burst AoE. Naturally, Retribution Paladins are very good with the Wake of Ashes talent. It's on a little bit of a cooldown. I think it's on 45 seconds or something, but that, you know, thing is a burst AoE as well. And certainly the Divine Storm periodically proccing. So with my talents, I have abilities that are, I think, resetting the cooldown on Divine Storm and increasing the Divine Storm's damage. So you will see it on my action bars. It's bound to my mouse wheel down button, and it lights up pretty often. So Divine Storm, when it crits, when it is boosted, it feels really good. It does a lot of damage around it. Retribution Paladins arguably are not a spec that is particularly complex, and I know, well, not that many specs in World of Warcraft are particularly complex. Retribution, what I would say in favor of Retribution for me, Gyro, me specifically, is the fact that the spec is just right in terms of the number of buttons that I need to press to be reasonably efficient. So you know how I prefer the fewer buttons the better. So far, as far as the fewer buttons are concerned, Survival Hunter spec is the leader of them all, because I'm not playing Arcane Mage. Otherwise Arcane Mage also would be somewhere high up there. But from my enjoyment, Survival Hunter at the moment leads as far as the number of buttons. is concerned. Now, Retribution is somewhere around those, I don't know, 6-7 effective buttons that I need to have mapped and that I need to keep an eye on, really, to be reasonably good and dishing out respectable amount of damage to do full clear of a horrific vision, for example, which is my kind of level where I think the spec is satisfying my needs as a casual altoholic and a player. But the fact that Retribution is so squishy, it's so squishy. Maybe I should have been giving out Oscars for the squishy of World of Warcraft as opposed to a glass cannon, but that was what came to mind when I was preparing this video. I'm sorry if it wasn't very funny. I am trying to entertain you guys as much as I can, while entertaining myself as well. The fact of how squishy, just how squishy Retribution is bugging me so much. You know those videos that I prepare as power checks when I just have a fresh alt who is barely 430, 420, 430 and barely taking first steps into horrific visions? So these videos that I'm showing to you, they are full clears. They are, well, attempting to give you a more all-rounded, more kind of mature, for the lack of a better word, impression of how the power is and how the class feels. But those power check videos, I think, are still fair and interesting, well, to me to produce, hopefully for you to watch sometimes, because you know just how much raw power and how much of raw potential the class has. Because a lot of classes, a lot of specs, they start shining with higher item levels of gear once you have every talent imaginable. And you know, I would argue that not for all, but for a lot of classes, well, it is easier to start shining when you have a lot of gear, when you can just overpower, can just throw item level at the content. You just throw item level and say, I'll eat it up anyway, which is what it is. But raw power that is shown by the class in its ungeared form is something to pay close attention to when you're choosing alts, when you're watching these videos and maybe coming up with your ideas. So Retribution, as a raw power check a while ago on this or on another paladin, I have a couple, was actually fairly low. Was fairly low for me. I was not impressed with how Retribution was faring when I first tried it. In fact, I remember now that I felt disappointment with how actually squishy and how it definitely was. Like I was surprised to discover back then of how squishy and insufficient amount of damage it was pumping out to compensate for squishiness, perhaps it was back then. Now that the cloak rank is higher, now that the gear level, the item level is higher, now that I have the third tier of Twilight Devastation, the one that hits for 18% of your health. That is a lot. Like, I would not say that success of this run is attributed purely to Twilight Devastation, but it helped a lot, like, absolutely. So now that I have all of that, now that it's a bit of the character is a bit more of a package, right? It does feel better. I'm gonna say it does feel better. So when I say glass cannon, when I say squishy, doesn't mean that I am not enjoying it, but with all of that hopefully now starting to coalesce into a bit of a vision for you as my viewer, as my supporter, no pun intended by the way, as far as coalescing into a vision statement is concerned, I would not give very high score to Retribution on my scale that I'm sharing with you right here. I would say it's good. It's good, it's doable, but I obviously have an overpowered, relatively overpowered choice of a corruption effect here, which not all of my classes do have. As you know, I'm doing these horrific vision runs for you and reporting on how I feel about performance of the class, but not all of them have Twilight Devastation 3. Some of them do, and it makes a huge difference, right? Well, some of them don't. Experiment is not one-to-one. It's not apples and apples. It's always apples and oranges, and I will continue saying it to you guys. It might be a little repetitive for my regulars, but if you're new here, you need to hear it. Otherwise, you'll be like, what are you on about, man? well, it is not a very accurate experiment. So having said that, once again, I'll say that I have mixed feelings about Retribution spec. It is easy to play, it is not too many buttons, it's just the right number of buttons that goes as a plus for me. It is a respectable amount of damage that it's putting out. It is, I wouldn't say it's top damage, I wouldn't say it's the easiest amount of damage to pump out as well, and I'll clarify this in a second. But the squishiness, the glass cannonness is what, for me personally, as a self-reliant player, as someone who doesn't run in a group, I only play solo, it's sort of, I had to take points off for that, basically. Yeah. And what I mean by not the easiest class to make sure I dish out that respectable damage, well, squishiness I already mentioned. When you cannot just stand and bang. I know that I do that in some cases, but I also do not feel super confident at those moments, and also the food buff is running, don't forget. So here, just as with Enhancement Shaman, squishiness is concealed a little bit from you, which is my mistake, of course, but I wanted to do a full clear, and this is what I believe enables me to do this full clear, especially in a harder horrific vision. Stormwind is a harder horrific vision compared to Orgrimmar, as we all know and as we discussed to death. Yeah, so to dish out that respectable amount of damage, you always need to be in melee range. So you always need to continue being bashed by the mobs. That's not the easiest thing to execute when you don't have a pet and you don't have a luxury of being at range or any resemblance of range or any resemblance of kiting. You cannot even kite particularly well here. Yeah, so these are kind of my, again, not particularly scientific, not particularly number crunchy thoughts for you guys. Retribution is not a bad spec. It's certainly very, very popular. How do I enjoy it personally? I enjoy it a lot less than I enjoy, say, Protection, because Protection Paladins are fantastic for a specific purpose of tanking or clearing horrific visions, but slightly differently. Not rallying is the wrong word. Grouping up all the mobs that I can, line of sighting them, making sure they come to me, and then AoEing them while just scratching my head and la 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 singing a song, because nothing can kill me. I'm exaggerating vastly here, but I did have a full clear of Orgrimmar, I think, on Protection spec. This guy, this same tune, who I've respect, yeah, and I'll report on that soon to you. And Protection feels amazing. Protection does feel fantastic. A little low on damage output, but what else is new, right? Retribution doesn't feel that way. It doesn't feel that way. It doesn't give, personally, very personal opinion, doesn't give me that much satisfaction. Even with this Twilight Devastation, I always feel being bounced around, and I always feel being a little bit, even though my health doesn't seem to dip too much, but it is mainly thanks to the fact that I've learned something and I am making my pulls more conservative, especially when I know that it's a squishy-ish glass cannon type of spec. So I'm doing more conservative pulls. You see that, you know, in this area, I am not just doing my usual run where I pull all these three groups by the bank, here in the square, and a little bit up ahead there. So I didn't do that. Separating these groups into three smaller groups, well, guess what? Yes, of course it makes it easier, and even with the food buff and even separating these groups, my health still dips by a quarter periodically, if you paid attention to that. And if you are into the spec, if you are trying to decide for yourself whether you want to give it a shot, pay attention to that. Pay attention to that. As far as food buff is concerned, for any of these squishy classes, specs, Retribution, Enhancement are two main ones that come to mind, especially those that need to be in your face. Yeah, food buff, in my opinion, for a full clear, if not mandatory, you can make it work without it, but I think it makes your life much easier. You should absolutely use a food buff when you do that. That would be my kind of additional, sort of a little bit out of turn thought, but that I wanted to share with you. Anyway, guys, so these are my thoughts on Retribution. Let me know in the comments down below, what do you think about Retribution? Do you think that it's a bit of a face rolly spec? Have you tried Horrific Vision specifically as the staple content of this channel and something, that main thing that we have to do right now in the game in 8.3 before Shadowlands starts as solo players? How do you feel about Retribution? What's your item level? What's your talent setup? This wasn't a guide. This was just, once again, just my opinions with you, sharing with you guys. And would you consider, after watching this video, if you have not yet done it, would you consider using Retribution as your go-to spec to clear a Horrific Vision? Let me know. I'm curious to hear what you have to say. And soon, as I said, I will show to you the protection clear and how protection does feel different. Yeah, it feels very different. Well, duh, it's a tank spec. And a few others are coming your way every 2 days. Videos are coming to you just as the cadence is established. I think it works out well for me. I hope that it works well for you. I welcome that feedback as well, by the way. Subscribe if you haven't already. Your support, patronage is very, very much appreciated, guys, and not taken for granted. Thank you very much for your support. And listen to some funky music as always, and I will be talking to you very, very soon next time. See you later.
you.